Very welcome to today's seminar, to be given by Boris Lanin on the topic of George Orwell's Forerunners and Disciples, Anti-Utopia in Modern Russian Literature. Boris Lanin is professor of Russian literature at the Russian Institute of Theatre Arts, gitis, in Moscow. And he graduated with honors from Baku Slavic University in 1983 and received his candidate of philology in 1990. He obtained his doctorate in philology from Moscow State Pedagogical University in 1994, and you should know that at the time he was the youngest doctor of philology in Russia, at least as far as I learned. More importantly, he was also the first to complete a doctoral dissertation on Russian anti-utopia. After completing his doctorate, Boris served as a visiting professor at a number of distinguished institutes for advanced study, such as the Kennan Institute, later at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington, D.C., at Institut d'études avancées de Paris, at the Hokkaido Institute, at Stanford, Kobe, Waseda in Tokyo, and Saitama universities, and also at Alfried Krupp Wissenschaftskolleg, Greifswald. So he has indeed been around. In 2018, he was also National Endowment for the Humanities Distinguished Visiting Professor at the State University of New York in Potsdam. And he's a member of the Scientific Board of Study Center, Vasily Grossman, in Turin. Now, he has not just been around, but his work, his publications, have been published in a number of languages: German, Russian, English, French, Japanese, Korean, and Serbian languages, and includes some 20 books and textbooks and some 150 papers. And this information is a bit dated, so there might be more. He has also made considerable contributions to Russian educational system by way of developing school curricula and spreading new educational ideas on teaching and education at different levels in the system. And Lanin's literature textbooks for the 5th to the 11th grades are widely used at secondary schools in the Russian Federation. So this is a wonderful accomplishment. We are very honored to have Boris here today and as a visiting fellow at SCAS. And with these words, Boris, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Christina, for your generous introduction. I am very honored and very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to thank Professor Wittrock for inviting me after several years after my first application here. I had chance to improve my initial application, and probably now it was better. Okay, yes, we already did. Okay, thank you very much, yes. And I would like to start that with the statement that Russian utopia always considered social reality as something to be transformed. The title of Nikolai Chernyshevsky's novel, What is to be Done, is indicative. Utopia implied goal is the realization of a visionary future. Anti-utopia depicts its dark consequences. This summer was very dark and very hot in Moscow. People organized demonstrations, and policemen and special forces brutally cut their walks and the demonstrations, but they were walking with George Orwell books in hands. That is very important for Russian culture, because previously utopia was kind of textbook to rewrite the reality. And now educated population understood that this reality was based on Orwell's text. And anti-utopia suggests the negation of a specific utopian system or construct. It implies that there may exist a genuine utopia. Dystopia, the most common term in the Western humanities, dystopia suggests the impossibility of any utopia whatsoever. But before Orwell, there was Yevgeny Zamyatin, a son of Russian priest. In 1920, published a novel which was called We. And in that novel, we can see a person who works for the state, who is an intellectual, and who is absolutely happy. He is a typical utopian character until he meets a woman. He meets a woman who represents an intellectual freedom, sexual freedom, and who explains him how unhappy he really was. And this novel became a source for George Orwell's novel, because the scheme of the plot was exactly the same. And Orwell knew that novel. Even more, he wrote a review on that novel where he values Zamyatin's novel We very highly, and he says that this novel is a real key for understanding Russian reality, which didn't exist by the moment of writing and the moment of publication. The benefactor in Zamyatin's novel is Big Brother. Instead of TV screen, people live in glass walls, in glass chambers. Their sexual life is strictly limited. They cannot walk, they can only march. And they are ready to start war, which happens in 1984. So everything was predicted before, except one thing. Stalin was nothing at that time. In 1920, nobody knew about him. He was just a party functionary. But Zamyatin himself insisted that this novel was directed against Fordism, against Ford and his way of exploitation. Zamyatin was typical Orthodox Marxist. He worked in Newcastle at the wharves. He was an engineer, and he had a feeling that the British socialism is very dangerous for the mankind. Not Russian socialism, but the British socialism. And when he returned home, when he returned to Russia, he found that his novel cannot be published over there. So the novel was published almost 1 year after the final review, the final reviewing, and with one very interesting note, translated from the Czech language. So he couldn't publish it openly. He said that he sent it abroad. And then somebody just translated it from the Czech publication. But nobody ever saw that Czech publication. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe now. So that's how it looks like. Three main themes Zamyatin introduced. The citizens, the numbers, who are absolutely devoted to the benefactors. What happened here? Sorry? Oh, sorry, it didn't work. Okay, the enigmatic symbol that gives happiness to its holders. In 1984, it is a forbidden book. And in Zamyatin's novel We, it is some integral. Nobody knows how to use it, and nobody knows the purpose people build it. But it is just an enigmatic symbol, a symbol of happiness. Here is just note the first cover of the publication of 1984, and 1984 has very interesting history in Russian culture. It was published as soon as it was published in English. It took them 2 years to translate into Russian. It was published in 3,000 copies, which is nothing for the USSR. And it was distributed only between the inner party's members. Only they could read it. And the name of translator was never mentioned. It was a text as a symbol of perverting the Soviet reality, which had no name, no translation, no data of publication, and so on. So this book, in fact, was a wide metaphor, a wide metaphorical definition of the totalitarian state. At the same time, it became a classical pattern for anti-utopian genre. Now, let's try to look at this novel from the visual aspect. Let's try the visual aspect of this novel. There were 3 movies on that novel made very soon after it appeared, and this spring in Moscow on the federal TV channel, they celebrated 70 years of the publication of that novel. So on the streets, people march in the demonstrations with the books in hands. And on state TV, they celebrate the anniversary of this novel, and they show the movie again widely with the comments of the scholars, with discussions and so on and so on. This is rather anti-utopian, reality in current Russian culture. Just to remind you, so here are Inksot's principles: war and peace, freedom and slavery, ignorance is strength, and for Orwell, who tried to discuss with Bentham and who wrote a review on his essay, the demagogy of the ruling party was the worst in the modern world. So he was struggling first against the demagogy, and he was playing with language. Of course, he borrowed the plot from Zamyatin's novel We, but great literary work had been done after that. he worked with style. He invented that permanent war situation, and that makes us suspect that the best model of describing the anti-utopian world is George Agamben's extracted state. The extracted state puts a person in position of permanent guilt, and people are punished not for what they have done, not for the crime they committed, not for who they are, as it usually happens in a genocide state, but they are punished for being born in this state. You've been born here, that's why you are guilty. So what else was predicted in that novel? Stalin's type skyscrapers. We have 7 skyscrapers in Moscow that were built in 1950, 7 symbols of Stalin's power. The building of Moscow State University, of several hotels, Hotel Ukraine, Hotel Leningradskaya, and so on and so on. Then certainly Big Brother that watches people everywhere and all the time. Here Big Brother is watching Winston. It is. And in the next movie, same background but colored. We cannot see the color because of the quality. Sorry about that, but it is colored. Please trust me. And here, and the panorama of anti-utopian London. Sorry, it is early picture, no London eye here. It is anti-utopian, not utopian. And here, in early movie, Goldstein is a wild enemy. And in the next movie, the Goldstein is wise enemy. So the quality of the battle changed from real physical political battle world went to the intellectual battle. And that's why Goldstein suddenly becomes wise. Here, Smith and OBrien are interlocutors. By the way, in the first movie, the character wasn't OBrien, but the name of the actor was O'Brien. That's why they changed the name of the character. But movie can give us additional hidden meanings. And here, O'Brien is Winston Smith's father. He puts his hand on O'Brien's shoulder, on Winston's shoulder, and he always was a father. And together they saw Winston's mother dead, and look at the face of that actress. You cannot see that scene in the novel. It is very visual, and it was just invented for the movie. And look at the face, and then Winston meets a prostitute in the Proles district of London, and she has the same face. The same actor is there. So playing with the Freudian motives looks very cunning here. He plays with that, but at the same time, he perverts them. And certainly, the cultural background of that film is also very deep. So this is a paraphrase of Svidrigaïlov's Vaporarium with spiders from Crime and Punishment. Svidrigaïlov is a person who seduced a little girl, and he commits himself at the end of the novel, but his dream is that Vaporarium full of spiders. The spiders symbolize his sins and all the crimes he committed in his life. And at the end of that novel, in the first film, they are happy together, and in the second film, they never were happy. So two films give us two different approaches to the novel and two different interpretations of the final meaning of that novel. So here, while eating in cafeteria, nevertheless, Big Brother always watching. You can see the face of Big Brother over there. Not very clear, but that's how it was supposed to be there. Not clear, but still there. And every anti-utopian hero has a creative gift. People are very happy in utopian society until somebody tries this total happiness on his own fate. Am I happy? And when he understands that he is very unhappy person, he lost the meaning of his life. He starts his way in the plot as a anti-utopian character. But every anti-utopian character is gifted. Otherwise, it is bad novel. He should be gifted, and he should write his inner text within the novel. The engineer D503 in Zamyatin's We used to write his diary very regularly, every day, line by line. And Winston Smith finds his place in the room, not to be seen from the TV screen, and he writes his diary too. He tries to preserve real history. His work is to pervert history, to rewrite history, but his notes are real history of the society, are real history of the mankind. People should know what happened indeed. One of the characters he invented was some officer Ogilvy. He's kind of new saint. He's brave officer who committed himself, blew up himself to kill dozens of enemies, so on, but he never existed. He is typical anti-utopian saint. And in every anti-utopian novel since then, those saints appear. They give additional volume to the hierarchy of the characters. Here, 2 minutes of hate. And a protagonist that always writes his own text, and back to back with Julia, facing tortures and passions. But even when he is torturing, O'Brien is the father. And in the first version, Winston Smith is broken. In the second, he is looking the same, but look at those smiles. Here, dead man's smile, and Winston Smith in the in the latest movie, feels that now he was cured. Cured, but still new sufferings ahead. And, in Russia, literary works cannot be considered as classical if they are not studied at secondary schools. So certainly in the Soviet times it was out of question that Zamyatin can be taught at school or studied at school, same with Orwell. But so it took me almost 25 years to bring them to secondary school. Zamyatin was published widely in 1988 only, so 4 years after Perestroika started, and it appeared in the school curricula in 1992, and Orwell came to the school curricula only in 2014. So it took quite time. But now thousands of children read and study these novels as compulsory reading. So now anti-utopia in contemporary Russia have transformed from a literary genre into a method of modeling reality and depicting the near future. The orientation to political issues happened because of postmodernism's legacy, with its border-crossing trends that reshape the reader's picture of the world. Then, the transformation into mass literature, from intellectual mainstream into mass literature. So we can understand that not very deep readers would never try to read We. They were not interested in that novel. Same with Orwell. Orwell was only for ideological front, for ideologically, charged bureaucrats of the Communist Party. But all the disciples became part of mass culture. And because modern anti-utopia becomes kind of universal, social, philosophical, futurological, and literary genre. And literary probably in the last place. So we can structure the mainstream of the genre and distinguish several various models of future. First, Buddhist model, very rare for Russian literature. Very, not too many Russian writers, maybe the late Tolstoy and early Bunin were Buddhists in their writings. But in modern dystopia, we got a group under pseudonym Holm van Zajcik, and they published 6 dystopias that were very popular in late 90s. Then, Muslim model. Certainly that Islamophobia is something which is a great source for modern Russian anti-utopia. You can see several, just 2 novels here, and that novel, Notre Allah de Paris, is a novel written by a Russian Catholic woman, and it is not very easy to be a Catholic in modern Russia. It's much easier to be non-Christian than being Christian and not Orthodox Christian. And she wrote that novel about some group of Catholic extremists that try to struggle to new Muslim rulers of Paris. And Notre Dame de Paris became a mosque, and she tries, and that group tries to capture that mosque, to serve a mess there, and then blow up the whole building with themselves. So that's the fabula of that Anti-Utopia. Then pseudo-liberal, the dictatorship. It is a pamphlet against Putin, by the way, which was allowed. In 2008, it was possible to publish something against Putin. It was 11 years ago, and that novel was very popular because the author was famous radio journalist Dorenko. He died recently in the accident, in the motorcycle accident, not car accident, motorcycle accident. Then the most popular, the Orthodox imperial model, that model is popular first because of the lack of the political culture. People want to see new Tsar. That's why they vote for the same and the same person. They're thirsty for Tsarism. They need a Tsar who would, and after this Tsar, that authority will be inherited. And we have, hundreds of anti-utopian novels that try to interpret that Tsarism and that idea of imperial model from various sides. So you can see Vyacheslav Pietsukh and Krusanov, and certainly one of the best, if not the best, Russian writers today who lives in Berlin now, Vladimir Sorokin. Then, certainly, pseudo-Kafkian dystopia. They try to play with the image of the castle, but in Russian way. So various limited territories where something unusual happens, and those models are also very popular, and the novels with that structure appear every year, maybe thousands. And the permanent state of civil war, Jihad Zhede, by one of the most productive Russian writers and journalists and poets and critics, Dmitry Bykov. Well, actually, everything that he writes is very important to understand modern Russian culture. He is number one in Russian culture. First, because he is very productive. Second, because he is an extremist. And when you read the extremists, you get the final point of any idea. Here, he tries to show the history of Russia in the 20th century as a history of permanent civil war between proto-Jews and proto-Russians. Proto-Jews that came from Khazars, the Khaganate, and proto-Russians that were always here and who are, just the native people and so on. But actually what happens in the end, if you read it in sober mind, you understand that you are reading one more anti-Semitic novel, because because from the very beginning he shows that those proto-Russians are real natives. They are indigenous people here in Russia, and all others are simply not Russians, and this land doesn't belong to them. And they just start that civil war that really that symbolizes a terrible history of Russian people, and the main model of this novel is circle, and everybody and everything is moving around that circle, and from one train to another train, and finally to the tram. And in Russian literature, train is always a symbol of life, and tram is always a symbol of death. Just Dr. Zhivago dies in the tram, and not only in Nikolai Gumilyov's poetry we can see mad tram. That is also a kind of death of sober mind. And another model is Anti-Utopia of escapism. Also, you can see here Dmitry Bykov and Vladivostok 3000. Because of the great territory of Russia, each land, each province has its own utopia of separate life. And Vladivostok, so far away from Moscow, 9 hours flight from Moscow, certainly cherishes dream of its independence, because Japan is very close, and Korea is close, and China is closed, and Russia is so far away through Siberia from Vladivostok. And here is one more utopia of escapism here by Ilya Lagutenko, who is very famous Russian pop star, the founder and the frontliner of the Mummy Troll group. And he represents old Russian family who really left its invaluable legacy in Russian culture, because his grandfather was a great architect who invented so-called Khrushchev's buildings, very cheap buildings that started to appear after World War II in 1956, after Stalin's death. Before that, there was no building construction in the Soviet Union, and he invented those flats with 6 centimeters walls. Actually, he invented 4 centimeters walls to make them cheaper and to give people more space. But Khrushchev says no, people have a liberty, to have a privacy and to beat their wives in privacy. And if you beat your wife in 4 centimeters a room, everybody will know that. Let it be 6 centimeters. Probably it was a great contribution to gender studies in Russia too. Next, Global Empire. This is a very strange novel which is called The Third Empire, where the borders of the whole world are changed, and only 2 large empires remain. One is certainly Great Russia, and another one is Latin America, because Northern America simply doesn't exist. And that idea of New World has no plot. It is just a large, huge essay, which probably doesn't worth any attention, but the author was vice speaker of Russian parliament at the time he published it, and you can understand which kind of world model Russian rulers had at that time. And now he passed away. At rather early age, by the way. And the current state of Crimea is different. Sometimes imaginary borders are much more restrictive than physical ones. But current case of Crimea is different. The initial plan of occupation of Crimea, the occupation that happened in 2013, was described first in Vasily Aksionov's novel Island of Crimea in 1980, which was very famous, Anti-Utopia, published abroad, published in Ardis, Ann Arbor, and Vyacheslav Rybakov's novel The Skylark in 1999. When I was giving a presentation of those novels in 2015, the representative of the journal Znamya, the flag, said that, oh yes, I remember that novel, we declined it, we didn't publish it because it was very nationalistic. But I replied, I'm quoting, looking at your journal, you did publish it in 1999, so it was a pure provocation against the Ukraine. You published a novel where people go to Crimea and just join the people and join that island, and that, actually it's not island, it's a peninsula, and that peninsula becomes Russian. But now it is shame to admit that they published it in 1999. So 6 distinct aspects of anti-utopias as they appear in Russian fiction. The anti-utopia stands in debate with the whole genre while clothing its argument in aesthetically engaging form. The hero of anti-utopia is always eccentric. He lives according to the laws of the fairground spectacle. There is, strictly speaking, nothing surprising about this, for the Bakhtinian Carnival also represents the triumph of eccentricity, and those who take part in the Carnival are at the same time actors and spectators. The anti-utopia is distinguished by its emphasis on the individual, his or her hopes and troubles, its anthropocentricity. The individual in the dystopia is always opposed to his or her environment. And another structural peculiarity of the anti-utopia is the ritualization of life. In a society that has realized utopia, ritual governs everything and precludes the chaotic operation of the individual. Indeed, life is now programmed. Narrative conflicts arises where the individual rejects his or her role in the ritual in favor of his or her own path. The structural pivot of the anti-utopia is pseudo-carnival. The principal difference between the classic concept of carnival as developed by Mikhail Bakhtin and its Janus phase, the pseudo-carnival, the spawn of the totalitarian age, lies in the fact that carnival is based on ambivalent laughter, whereas the pseudo-carnival is built on absolute terror. In contrast to laughter, which is ambivalent and enters into many binary positions, terror is unconditional and absolute. Finally, we will turn our attention to the theme of sadomasochism. The sadism of authority is directed downwards, while the masochism of the individual is directed upwards, towards authority. The repressive pseudo-carnival is structured around this reciprocity. As the carnivalesque's attention to the physical body and the pleasures of the lower bodily stratum here leads to the hypertrophy of sadomasochistic tendencies. probably I would stop here, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your time.